Pikmin is a strategy game about strength in numbers, of Pikmin specifically, and in fact the whole reason it exists is because Nintendo wanted to show off just how many Pikmin the newfangled Gamecube could handle at once. But at this point, my Gamecube is old and dusty and bad in garbage, and it can't handle that amount of dudes on screen. So what the heck, let's play Pikmin without the Pikmin.
What?
Now you'd think the rules here would be really simple, but for some odd reason the game called Pikmin kinda forces you to get Pikmin. Specifically, you get one of each type as you discover them throughout the game. Since these guys are literally forced though, I decided to let them slide as my one exception, with my rule being that I'm not allowed to make any extra Pikmin. And I know that sounds cheaty, but who knows, maybe allowing these three guys is what ends up being the main reason that this challenge is extremely cool and interesting or something, I don't know. So with all that out of the way, it's finally time to answer the question. Is it possible to beat Pikmin without making Pikmin? We start off in the snow zone, and although I've been following the rules just fine, Louis, the dang idiot, went ahead and made 20 of the suckers in no time. Who can blame him though? You need those Pikmin to carry back this waifu cup full of gamer subs, and that's a pretty good deal considering he didn't even use the promo code SAMPLE, for which there's a link in the description by the way. And I know you guys tried the free samples from the last video, okay? I can see what you do. And yeah, I get it, it's a hilarious pun and it tastes really good, it's a huge deal. Wait, what am I doing? This is Pikmin 2. Silly me, I didn't even make that mistake. Okay, so to actually start the challenge, we crash land our ship at the impact site, which marks day 1 of our survival, which is, lucky me, the worst day in the entire challenge. Now you might think that that's because this is a tutorial area, which are infamously dreadful in challenges like this. And you'd be half right, because yeah, this place really wants us to learn how to make Pikmin. We're only given one little guy to start, who I'm gonna name Stefan, yeah, his name's Stefan. But after plucking that guy, the game expects us to make 9 more Pikmin to push this big box out of our way, and then 10 more to pick up and carry our first ship part, the engine. There are 30 of these parts, and clearing paths for Pikmin to transport them back to my ship to eventually fix it up and escape the planet is the primary goal of this game, which is obviously pretty rough, given my whole, situation. But in all honesty, that's not really why day 1 is the worst day in the challenge. I mean, finding a way to move objects without Pikmin is something we're gonna have to deal with throughout this entire run, so this area is not unique in that regard. No, instead, the actual reason day 1 sucks is way more subtle. I can't lay down. Yeah, you probably didn't even know you could do this, but pressing down on the D-pad makes Olimar lay down on the ground. It barely does anything, I don't know why it's a mechanic, but it is there. But for some ungodly reason, you're just banned from using it on day 1. Specifically day 1. It's insane. I have no clue why it just removes one of your controls, as if laying down is too advanced for the tutorial or something. Now I know this is gonna make me sound like a crazy person, but laying down is by far the most important mechanic in this challenge, and the fact that we can't do it on day 1 is devastating. We're completely useless. This means that collecting the engine in our current state is absolutely out of the question, and we instead gotta shift our focus into getting the heck out of here. Unfortunately, unlike every other day in the game, day 1 has no time limit and no way to trigger a sunset from the pause menu, so we can't just skip over it for fun. And to further lock us into this prison, this area spawns 0 enemies on day 1, meaning that we can't forcefully end the day by killing Olimar. The game wants us to learn how to make Pikmin so bad, but there is still one other way to end a day early, and that is to cause a Pikmin extinction. This means that if we can find a way to, wait, yeah, hold on, just go over there for a second, okay. This means that if we can find a way to kill Stefan, then we might be able to have a ticket out of here. The issue is that the only hazards capable of killing Pikmin in this entire area are way the heck over here. Like, that's happening. How in the world do I expect to get enough height to clear these massive walls in a game where we can't even jump at all? Oh wait, I do that all the time, never mind. So surprise, surprise, there are actually tons of ways to gain height in this game. But the best option in our current state is to utilize these bits of high ground to potentially get on top of the map's outer edge, which we could use to access the danger zone. So by finally putting Stefan to some good use, I was able to get this to happen. I don't know if there's a name for this, so I'm gonna coin it the squish climb. There are some slopes in this game that are just a little too steep for Olimar to climb up at his base walking speed, which includes the corner of this tiny wall. But we can get a bunch more speed than normally intended by abusing this game's insanely broken collision system, specifically the interaction between Olimar and objects. Rather than just blocking Olimar outright like walls, the game for some reason lets him walk inside of objects a short bit before eventually deciding that it actually doesn't like that and forcing him out of there. We can abuse this by having Stefan carry this nearby pellet into this congested area, which squishes Olimar in between it and the wall. The game looks at this, sees that our man is omega squished, and then runs this bit of code, probably, which pushes Olimar in the opposite direction of the pellet, allowing us to climb this wall slope and get that extra tiny bit of height that we need to access no man's land. From there, I have to quickly turn around and whistle Stefan from off screen so he doesn't just mindlessly carry back the pellet and fail the challenge. In fact, by carefully treading on this wall, we can even pick him up off the ground, so we can bring him along on our out-of-bounds journey, which eventually led us to salvation. By sacrificing Stefan to the clam god, I was able to cause a Pikmin extinction, cause you know, all one of them died, forcing day 1 to finally come to an end. But if we had to kill in order to escape Purgatory, then that only means that we're stuck in hell. The game literally lies to us by saying that we've collected the engine and are able to move on to other areas even though it knows this isn't the case, meaning that we're forced to go right back on into that first area and figure out how to actually get the engine this time. Except things are a little different these days. First off, although Stefan unfortunately didn't make it, the Onion threw us a bone by giving us a replacement, which is perfectly legal by my challenge rule standards. Say hello to our new red Pikmin, Stephanie. Yes, Stephanie now. Beyond that though, there are also two other important differences between our day 1 situation and now. Firstly, there's now a 13-minute time limit for the whole day, which is pretty terrible news considering that we only have 30 days to complete the game before Olimar literally dies. So, yeah, it's a bit of pressure all of a sudden. But the second difference might just be what we need to make that time limit manageable. Oh yeah, we can lay down now. And although it seems completely irrelevant that we've unlocked this seemingly completely useless ability, allow me to introduce two tricks that'll start making this challenge make sense. And the first one is revolutionary. That's right, we can move objects now. We're in business. This is object nudging, and the way it works is actually pretty simple. Whenever you lay down as Olimar, it transforms him from the player to just any other object, which also changes his collision properties. As we've kind of already talked about, objects will try and push the player away if they end up inside each other. But on the other hand, if two objects are colliding, then they'll push each other away. This difference allows us to move objects by first walking inside of them and then laying down right before the game tries to push Olimar away. Once he's an object, the game sees that they're inside each other and applies force to both of them, which slightly nudges the object forward. This can then be repeated to move parts long distances without even needing Stephanie's help. But we can eliminate our sole Pikmin's responsibilities even further by introducing another extremely important application of laying down, squish clipping. Much like with the squish climb, we can use nudging to get objects right up close and personal with the wall before shoving Olimar right up in between them. From there, we can lay down to once again objectify him. This increases the size of his collision and displaces him a ton, which can allow him to completely pass through thin walls. These new bits of tech allow us to nudge this pellet closer to this wall, clip out of bounds on our own this time, navigate to the danger zone, move another pellet to clip through another wall, and finally reach the engine. And now that we have the ability to both access this part and move it all on our own, we can see that we did all that for nothing! That box we never pushed? Yeah, it's still there, blocking our only path. And although Olimar can clip through walls easy peasy, objects have a much harder time being convinced to do so. Despite that, I was able to find a way to clip the engine through the floor, which is promising, but no matter how I did it, it would always respawn on the wrong side of the box. We did all that, but still have no leads. Or at least, regarding the engine, that is. That's right, there actually is another part here that we have access to, the positron generator. We're supposed to come back later to collect this thing with blue and yellow Pikmin, but if we can't get the engine right now, then this one might have a bit more promise. The biggest immediate issues are that we gotta both kill this clam to access it and bust down this wall to clear a path for it, both of which, while possible, take up a ton of time with only one Pikmin at our disposal. So I went ahead and restarted the entire file so I could revive Stefan on day 1. Except this time, rather than immediately executing him, I took advantage of the fact that this day doesn't have a time limit to get both the wall and the clam out of our way, which makes day 1 at least a little productive. Anyway, now that we're back to day 2, we can start realistically thinking about getting that generator. I mean, it's right there. And although making it to the part and nudging it along is extremely slow, you have to understand that I am also extremely good at video games, so making it to the wall didn't actually take too much time. No, instead, the actual problem with this part is getting it out of the dang water. Although nudging is great when it comes to covering level terrain, it completely crumbles when facing off even slightly upward slopes, as we can't nudge the object fast enough to offset the distance it slides down in between nudges. I did get real close, but there's no way, as far as I can tell, to push this thing up the entire hill with nudging alone. I can't get the engine because there's a massive box in the way, and I can't get the generator because it's stuck in a dang pit. In my current state, I can't get either of these, let alone within the second day. But if we're gonna have to wait until day 3 before getting either part anyway, then we may as well take advantage of yet another little trick. A trick that might just make this challenge possible. Oh my gosh, it's out! Oh, there's no way that just works, dude. This is waypoint displacement, and unlike some of the other things I've covered thus far, this one's actually not a glitch at all. Basically, whenever a day ends, the game unloads the area you were just in. But it still needs to remember some of the things you did, like which walls you broke, which boss enemies you've killed, and which ship parts you've moved. But regarding the ship part positions, it's not 100% precise, and for good reason. For example, if you, say, got a part completely out of bounds before ending the day, the game's not going to want to keep the part there when you come back. That'd be dumb, and dare I say, it'd be stupid. Instead, the game appears to just have a bunch of set positions, or more accurately, set paths that the ship parts can respawn on. And the game uses the object's current exact position to determine which of those set positions it'll respawn at on the next day. Now, how it determines it, I got no freaking clue. Sometimes it's the tiniest little change in position will make it teleport across the entire dang map, and sometimes the respawn locations depend on whether or not you're freaking looking at it. The only consistency I could find was that putting an object in a spot that is clearly not supposed to be, like partially in a wall or in the path of a bridge, then it'll usually make it respawn somewhere else. But how it works doesn't matter, because we can absolutely exploit this mechanic to to an incredible degree. The generator was easy. Just leave it in that spot next to the wall, and the next day it'll be out and about. The engine was a little trickier though. Ending the day with it near the box would respawn it fairly far away, and ending the day with it to the right of the box would respawn it on top of this platform, for some reason. But ending the day with it to the left of the box can make something magical happen. Oh my gosh. Oh my god, dude. Oh, I can't believe that. 2 previously impossible parts have now become accessible. And so, after all this time and effort, by nudging our first ship part all the way over to our ship, we can finally, once and for all, see that we actually can't collect it. God dang it, give me a break, dude. Yeah, I hate to break the news like this, but even if you get a ship part to the ship without ever using Pikmin, it can't actually be collected unless the allotted number of Pikmin are carrying it. So no, we can't beat Pikmin without making Pikmin. Shocker. But come on, do you seriously think that I'm gonna throw away an already incredibly interesting and cool challenge just because of a technicality? That'd be so dumb. Instead, I'm just gonna make a tiny rule adjustment. I am allowed to make Pikmin, okay? Cry about it. But they're gonna be drones who are only allowed to carry parts, and they're only allowed to do so once I've gotten the part comfortably in the landing site, which is just a big circle that encompasses our ship and the onion. This means that for future areas, I'll first gather all the parts right next to my ship and then spend a day using my Pikmin to submit them all. This will change literally nothing about our strategies for this entire challenge, so I think it's a reasonable compromise to actually make what we're doing here possible. But if you think this is cheating, then yeah, I mean, fair enough, I guess. I am just making Pikmin. But anyway, with this adjustment, I can finally collect some parts. And luckily, both of them are pretty comfortably near the landing site already. So it should definitely be possible to get both of them in the same day by nudging them both near our ship and having Stephanie make the Pikmin necessary to submit them. Or, you know, it should be possible. As it turns out, the game is still a little shaken up as a result of us forcefully skipping day 1. So the game kinda half thinks we're still in the tutorial. And so collecting either one of the parts here triggers a flag that reminds the game that officially completing day 1 is still something I've actually yet to do. This then starts the "Congrats, you collected your first part" cutscene that ends the entire day before I get a chance at collecting the other one, punishing me for breaking the rules of my own challenge and putting my mental health in a state of absolute ruin. But even though we were cheated out of getting a part, this is actually technically a good thing, as undergoing that whole sequence finally unlocks a new area that we get to explore. I could, of course, go back to the tutorial zone and collect the engine, but I decided not to do that right now because we have no time to waste. Like I've already mentioned, the primary goal of this game is to collect all 30 ship parts in only 30 days, and at this rate, we are doing terribly. However, it's actually not as bad as it looks, as 5 of the ship parts in the game are actually completely optional, which means that we are definitely cutting them out. Additionally, we completely skipped collecting the engine, which is not something you were supposed to be able to do. This gave me hope that at the end of the game, it wouldn't actually check if I had collected the engine and just assume that I've got it covered. So through the art of moving the goalposts, we now have 27 days to collect the remaining 23 parts, which isn't the absolute worst thing. My initial idea then, going into this new, much larger area, was that I should focus on collecting at least 1 part per day, leaving myself 3 days of leniency if any parts were extra far away or required some spawning displacement. However, my first attempt at day 4 in the Forest of Hope showed that there was in fact no hope for this approach. At first, it seemed pretty standard. I used a pellet in this initial area to clip through a wall, beelined it towards the first part I could find, the fuel dynamo, and spent the day nudging the part all the way back to the landing site. 1 part in 1 day, that's perfectly fine, isn't it? Well, not really. As it turns out, the fuel dynamo is easily the simplest part to get in the entire game. It's insanely close to the landing site and has exactly 1 breakable wall blocking its path. If this thing takes an entire day for me to collect, then there's no way I'm gonna be able to collect parts like the shock absorber, which is similarly close by, but surrounded by more enemies and rockier terrain, the Sagittarius, which requires Pikmin to build 2 bridges for us to even access, the Geiger counter, which is both blocked by another dang box and is lodged in the neck of a snakebird thing, the radar and bolt, which are both blocked by a massive ledge and a massive wall respectively, and the worst of them all, the godforsaken radiation canopy, which is located 18 miles away from our base and is blocked by 3 walls and a whole bug dude. Collecting 1 part per day just isn't feasible. We're gonna need a different strategy. Except we already kind of found one, didn't we? Even though we didn't learn what we were supposed to in the tutorial, it did still teach us an extremely valuable lesson. Tunnel visioning on 1 part at a time is a big mistake, but splitting our focus between multiple parts at a time can allow us to not only actually collect them, but also collect them at a similar rate. In fact, the existence of waypoint displacement incentivizes that we try to move not just 1 or 2 parts per day, but as many parts as we can possibly manage in a day. That way, we can leverage the maximum amount of displacement in between days. And although we won't be able to collect 1 part per day, doing this, we might actually be able to collect them at a similar or even faster rate. So with this new approach, alongside some knowledge on where all the parts we need to collect are located, I decided to start over and try again. My new plan being to circle around the entire map, pushing as many parts as I possibly can on the way. This is the new and improved day 4. Now the day started off pretty similar. I first threw Stephanie at this wall to eventually break it down later before again using this pellet to clip through a wall. Except this time, it's not your average everyday wall, it's a thick wall. The game really doesn't like the idea of placing Almar just fully inside of a wall, so it instead compromises by placing him on top of it, allowing us to get into these out-of-bounds areas without needing any initial high ground. From there, I made my way towards the first part of the day, the shock absorber, and rather than nudging it myself, I decided to enlist the help of my good friend, Jim. Jim isn't the brightest bulb, but he's certainly one of the strongest, and if he really puts his back into it, then it's possible for him to nudge objects way further and way faster than I can myself, using a technique that I call bulb orb nudging. The trick here is that Jim isn't powerful enough to move parts by walking into them, but his face is. This means that every nudge requires us to first lead Jim right next to the part, then bait out an attack before swiftly schmoving out of the way, which is made much easier by the fact that laying down gives you brief invincibility, but much harder by the fact that bulb orb nudging is insanely janky. I described it all elegantly, but in reality it barely works, and Jim often forgets that I exist, making it a little less useful than you may expect. But as a veteran Jim Wrangler, I managed to quite quickly transport the shock absorber into this pool of water. This is a great example of an area that is not a viable respawn point, so if I just leave it there overnight, then the part will teleport a little closer to my base. From now on, I'm gonna call these types of areas teleport spots. And now that we've got the shock absorber in a teleport spot, moving it around isn't gonna make it teleport any further, so we can move on to some other parts. I decided to skip over the radiation canopy for now, and instead waltzed all the way over here, when I came across these two seemingly inaccessible parts that we're totally about to access. I went ahead and punched the absolute heck out of this guy while simultaneously pushing him into this specific spot. This, with some luck, makes him drop a pellet right next to this wall that I can use to again clip out of bounds. I used the high ground to first access the bolt behind the massive wall, which I was able to nudge right next to this ledge. This not only puts it in a teleport spot that'll respawn the bolt beyond the wall tomorrow, but it also acts as my ticket out of here, as I use it to clip right back out of bounds. Once there, I tackle the radar, and you'd really think that all I'd have to do here is nudge it off the ledge, but nah, we do even less. I nudge it like 3 inches into a spot that teleports it off the ledge, and yeah, that's it, we're moving on. Now the next part to tackle in my big map circle is the Sagittarius, but on the way there, I decided to make a quick pit stop in this little walled off area. This place is mostly useless for us, but it does house the yellow onion, which isn't a part, but it does get us introduced to our second Pikmin, Jordan, who we just toss into the main area before using another enemy pellet to clip out of bounds again. Trust me, he will be important, but not right now, we got stuff to do. I do some more out of bounds navigation to access the Sagittarius from above without having to build those bridges I mentioned earlier. And here, I'm gonna give you a quiz. Do I A, push it off this ledge, or do I B, just push it into a spot that teleports it off the ledge? Here, I'll give you a second. The correct answer was C, you fool, you dumb idiot. I pushed it off the ledge and into a spot that teleports it. What, did you not even try? Anyway, after circling around the entirety of the map at this point, nudging as many parts as we could find into beneficial teleport spots, we once again come across our old friend, the fuel dynamo. This guy, in contrast to the last few parts we've moved, has no good nearby teleport spots, which means that spending almost an entire day nudging it ourselves seems inevitable. And yeah, it would be, if it weren't for the nearby Flint beetle. And hey, I don't even have to name this guy. Flint, unlike most other enemies, is just a solid block, capable of moving objects around if he decides to move in the right direction. The only issue with using him is that that is a massive if. Flint moves insanely randomly, with the direction he moves, how much he turns while moving, and how many times he moves, all being determined by random number generation or RNG. This means that the chances of Flint constantly moving in the exact perfect way multiple times in a row to move the object towards our base for us is astronomically low. Oh, guess I'm pretty lucky then, huh? Once Flint had run his course, we had just barely enough time left in the day to tackle exactly one more part, the Geiger counter, which, like I've mentioned, requires that we first defeat the burrowing Snagret. This guy unfortunately seems to be almost completely immune to bombs, which means that we're gonna have to assemble our entire army of 2 Pikmin to take him down. And doing so shows off the skills of our newest member, Jordan, who we will come to know as the GOAT. We can throw him much further than anyone else, which is occasionally relevant, but his biggest asset are his ears. Yeah, they're massive, which for some lore reason allows him to pick up and throw bomb rocks that can deal heavy damage to walls and most enemies completely by himself. God dang, what a guy. So, by using a bomb, I was able to reconvene with Stephanie and toss both of our soldiers onto this high ground. I, of course, also need to get up there somehow, and although these pellets totally look like they'd be able to clip us up there, I couldn't get it to work. Luckily though, Jim still got our back. This is bulb orb clipping, and it works for the same reason as bulb orb nudging. When Jim takes a dive, his massive schnoz acts as an object that can push other objects, which includes pushing me inside this wall, giving us that high ground we need to begin the boss fight of legends. Which just includes throwing all 2 of my Pikmin onto this guy's head and running around to distract him as much as possible. As you could probably figure, this combat strategy is a little lacking in the speed department, so once he dies, we only have a mere minute left of the day. But I mean, that's nothing to worry about. All I gotta do is push this Geiger counter into another teleport spot with time to spare, and everything should be in the right spot tomorrow. Dang, as it turns out, the shock absorber, over the course of the entire day, slowly slid down this slope into a completely different teleport spot than we originally placed it in. So rather than respawning next to our base like we wanted, it respawns way out in the middle of no man's land. This is obviously pretty dang terrible, but we might just be able to use the last of our seconds to salvage the situation. Yes! Oh my god, that was almost terrible. And with that, the new and improved Day 4 has finally been completed. Where before, all we did was spend the entire day moving the fuel dynamo, now we moved the shock absorber right next to our base, the bolt past the wall, the radar off the ledge, the Sagittarius halfway across the lake, the Geiger counter dislodged from the Snagger's neck, and the fuel dynamo in basically the same spot. So, yeah, just a little bit better if you ask me. Of course, now that we have a really good start, and more importantly, a strategy and a set of tricks that allowed it to happen, we gotta do some planning for the rest of our days here. So let's take a look through our parts. These two guys are real close to my base already, so I decided to just ignore them for now so I could focus on the parts that are much further away, like these two guys. However, although they are kind of far, they're not too stressful for me, as we've already shown that Flint nearby can be used to cover that distance in no time. He only spawns there once per day, however, so we'll have to tackle them separately. But yeah, I mean, overall, the south side seems pretty manageable. It's the north I'm worried about. The radiation canopy I completely neglected yesterday is still the worst part in the area, so I'll have to put most of my effort into him. Additionally, although I did teleport these guys out of their prisons, they're still also pretty far. So since I'll be in the general area anyway, I may as well try and make some progress on them as well. So now that we've got a rough plan, let's execute it. The first order of business is to have Flint push the Geiger counter. And I suppose it's worth mentioning that no, I'm not actually that lucky. God, I wish though. Instead, I'm using the Savestate function on my Gamecube to manipulate the RNG so that Flint moves it in the exact right spots. So as a rule of thumb, from here on out, whenever I mention that something is super luck-based and that I had to manipulate RNG for it, it basically just means I threw myself at it over and over until it worked. That being said, after that, I had to manipulate RNG for another beetle, also named Flint by the way, so I could use him to clip out of bounds and access the radiation canopy. From there, I spent half the dang day sneaking it past this guy's guard without him noticing, I think, before coming across a bit of an issue. See, at this point, I had already done some testing and found that there is a teleport spot that respawns the part past the wall, but I didn't consider at the time how I myself was going to get past the wall, so I had to do some on-the-fly routing, which involved getting an extremely precise clip through the wall using the part itself. Yes! Yes! Oh my god. Anyway, from there, we only had one task left for the day, which was moving the radar and the bolt out of their little corner of the map. After backtracking a bit and enlisting Jordan to quickly clear out the area of enemies, I went ahead and pushed the radar closer to the bolt before making use of another incredibly important trick in this run, Pikmin nudging. See, Jordan is simply far too weak to carry either of these parts on his own, but carrying a one-way object behind the parts and subsequently pushing both of the parts simultaneously, yeah, obviously is strong enough for that. What made you think otherwise? Now, although this seems pretty dang good for us on paper, and I mean, yeah, it is, I use it constantly throughout the rest of the challenge, it is a lot harder when you have to push two parts simultaneously. But after a bit of Pikmin nudging followed by a slick transition into Bulborb nudging, that's right, we got strats, Day 5 finally came to an end. With the Geiger counter mad close to our base, the radiation canopy ready to teleport, and both the bolt and radar merely one wall away from victory. Slowly but surely, we were closing in. Planning for Day 6 was pretty dang easy at this point. There are only two parts that are a significant distance away from my base, so those are going to be our focus. And yeah, I basically just used the exact same route as yesterday, starting with the Sagittarius. Now, I initially thought that this guy was going to be effectively the same as the fuel dynamo and Geiger counter, but Flint was really struggling to get it out of the water. So I instead used Flint and my own dang self to push it all the way across the lake into a teleport spot that'll do the work for me. It's still kind of far, but we can work with it. From there, I once again enlisted the help of Flint number 2 to clip out of bounds so I could start pushing the radiation canopy down its path to the base. And wouldn't you know it, there's actually a third Flint in this area that I didn't even know about that I was also able to manipulate to get some good progress on all these parts at the same time. Jeez, these guys are carrying me. After that, and a bit more gym labor to get this trio next to our base, we had around a quarter of the day left. As such, I decided to release my grip from my own brain to unignore the dudes that are chilling by my base, because although they're close, they're not actually in yet. The way I got them was the same for all three. I would bait over a dwarf Bulborb behind the part, use Jordan to squish them and spawn a pellet, and then use Pikmin nudging to extremely quickly gather all of them in the landing site. It was the home stretch. Day 7, I didn't even freaking make a plan. The only part that I don't already have is this goober, but I was able to again use Jordan to nudge it back easy peasy. And after a good number of readjustments to assure all the parts were officially in the landing site, it was time to collect them all. Ah, wait, but first I gotta do that thing I'm not allowed to do. We need 20 extra drones to have enough to submit all these parts, and making them actually took a pretty dang long time on account of the fact that I'm only using one Pikmin to make them. Luckily though, there are plenty of pellets and little shear grub enemies in this area, all of which are light enough for Stephanie to handle on her own. And with that, we were finally able to submit all of the objects that we worked so hard to retrieve. 7 parts, 4 days, and only 5 seconds to spare. At this rate, we're looking back on track to fix our ship and escape the planet. Now that we've collected all the parts in the Forest of Hope except for the one we don't talk about, our ship is now powerful enough to access the next area, the Forest Navel. And this place is so much worse. Obviously, it's supposed to be a bit more difficult. There are more enemies and obstacles and whatnot, but there are also a couple things that hurt just this challenge in particular. And the worst of them is the fact that this area is immense. It doesn't look that much bigger than the Forest of Hope at a glance, but that area had pretty direct paths from the parts to the base, so they really didn't take too long. This place doesn't, not even close. It's full of winds and turns, and parts that look like they should be nice and easy to collect are almost always way longer than you think. It's terrible. And not only are the paths back to our ship longer, but the parts themselves are also way stupider. The two simplest parts are these two guys, the Ionium jet in a pond and the gear on a high ledge. We've already dealt with both of these situations before, so they won't be too complex. And they're kinda close to our base, you know, relatively. On the flip side, we got the analog computer, which is the furthest part in the entire dang game, and lucky me, it's also stuck in some water. But that thing pales in comparison to the Libra, one of the worst parts in the game. It's not only on a freaking floating island, but it's also sitting atop not one, but two high ledges. Yeah, not excited about that one. On the other half of the map, there's the filter, which is pretty cool because it's stuck in some water. Nearby is the spring, which is just on another ledge, and the Omega Stabilizer, guarded by this mushroom enemy, which, unlike last time, is something we're actually gonna have to eventually kill. But last, and certainly least, except for maybe the Libra, but we'll get back to that one later, we have the guard satellite. Now, if you're like the biggest idiot, then you might think nothing of this part. Sure, it's in another boss, and sure, it's got a big wall blocking its path, and sure, it's also real far away from our base, but those are all things that I've already had to deal with, aren't they? Well, not quite. Because unlike every other wall we've come across, this one is truly dreadful. It outlines one of the other big problems in this area. There are no bomb rocks anywhere. Obviously that's a lie, they're in two spots, but they suck so much. This one requires me to constantly throw Jordan up a bunch of ledges, which is incredibly time consuming. And the one that's closest to the wall we want to destroy, you know, big quotes on the word closest there, requires me to either build these bridges, which ain't happening anytime soon, or again throw Jordan around to ensure he doesn't drown while grabbing them. Of course, this wouldn't be the worst thing ever if we only had to do it once, but since we only got one yellow guy, we gotta do it 6 times, once for every single individual bomb. And yeah, it takes half an entire day. Obviously this is terrible. This would be the most inefficient use of my time humanly possible, so I decided to pursue some other options to potentially skip the wall entirely. Unfortunately, unlike some of the other walls we've skipped thus far, there doesn't seem to be a spot that can teleport the part past this one, so we're gonna need something new. I initially planned to use a glitch that I remembered hearing about as a kid. It involves the Beady Longlegs, that's this guy's name by the way, escaping his arena, which would indeed be a pretty good thing for us as it would transport the part without us having to push it. Unfortunately, this is actually not true. It's just not real. Someone just lied about this being a thing. On the internet, no less. Why'd they do that? However, on the subject of glitches that actually do exist, there's one called bond duplication, which sounds exactly like the thing we're looking for, except for the fact that you need at least 2 yellow Pikmin to do it. Great. So, with all those ideas exhausted, I only had one left in the bank. Clipping the part through the floor. I had already accidentally gotten this to work on the engine way back when, and since then I found multiple other areas where clipping parts out of bounds is possible, so I figured that if I got super lucky, I might be able to clip the guard satellite in such a way that it respawns past the wall. However, this was a stretch, but I knew that, so rather than spending a bunch of time testing it, I decided to just start doing it on day 8 with no plan at all. If I couldn't get it to work, then I'd just reset, but if I could, then we'd have a pretty dang good start on our hands. But before making our way over to the part, I first gathered my troops and took a quick detour to meet our third and final little helper, Walter. Yeah, so remember when I said that Jordan was my goat? I lied. Walter is so much better. I would take 3 of them if I could. All he really does is just not drown in water, but I don't know if you've noticed, but there's kind of a lot of that, so Walter's gonna be our main guy for the rest of the challenge. For now though, I go ahead and take all 3 of them over to the part and throw them past the wall. This way I can access them once I get into the arena myself. How am I gonna do that, you ask? Well, I had to enlist the help of my good friend Bert by doing a trick called Wollywog transportation, and here's how it works. Like most enemies, Wollywogs have a home, which is just a point in 3D space, and they'll patrol a certain radius around that point. So if Olimar enters that radius, they'll jump at him to attack, and if Olimar exits the radius, they'll retreat back to the center of their home. But unlike most enemies, we can force Wollywogs to stray much further from their home than they're supposed to, by repeatedly triggering attack. Alright, anyway, so we can do so by first rubbing up against Bert, which gets him real angry, really makes him want to jump more than anything. But before he does that, we can swiftly move away to bait him a pretty far distance. Repeating this, we can get Bert all the way next to this wall, at which point I can use him to clip right through. Then I'm able to trigger one last attack from inside the wall's collision in order to get Bert himself into the arena, as he'll act as a surprise tool that'll help us later. And once he's in, I don't have to worry about him returning to his home because, you know. And now that I'm finally here, I can whistle all my Pikmin and challenge the Beady Longlegs to a fight for the ages. Which just involved throwing all my guys on him, and then constantly manipulating RNG to ensure that his attempts to shake them off would always fail. so it was actually just kind of sad, really. Once he was defeated, I managed to get the part as close to the wall as I could before my Pikmin just gave up trying, which means that it's now time to get Bert involved, using a trick that, to no one's surprise, I'm gonna call Wollywog nudging. You get the gist, I make him jump on the part, and sometimes it moves it a bunch. But once I got it next to the wall, I started to implement a completely different trick called Wollywog clipping, which is just me doing the exact same thing as Wollywog nudging, but hoping for different results. Over and over and over, I had Bert jump on that part, and regrettably, I never got it to clip through the floor. Instead, something even better happened.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah, it's through. And after the slightest bit of readjustment from inside the dang wall, I managed to find a teleport spot that officially broke it out for good. This was huge, but now it meant that I had to make a route on the fly, cause I still had half the day left. So I figured that killing the mushroom boss for the Omega Stabilizer was a no-brainer, cause it's the closest thing to me right now and I've already got my entire army with me anyway. But before that, I decided to get 2 other real quick things out of the way. The first was to move the spring a little bit, as it's also super close by and has an extremely easy teleport spot that'll get it off the ledge. The second was to get Walter just absolutely hammered. Making Pikmin drink nectar makes the leaves on their heads grow into flowers. This is not only extremely cute, but it also makes them move faster. And since the primary obstacle of this challenge is speed, and since the speed at which I collect parts is 100% dependent on the speed of my Pikmin, yeah, extra speed is pretty good. Anyway, after completing those simple tasks, I once again prepared my troops for another glorious battle. And this time, it actually was kind of interesting. This mushroom dude usually runs around in a defined circle in his arena, but by attacking him at certain intervals, I can make him trip over multiple times in a row to get him to fall out of this path. Using this, I was able to get him into this corner, so that when he finally died, the part inside of him was launched onto this ledge. This saves the extra effort of moving the part out of his arena, which in hindsight, it was probably not worth the trouble. Anyway, with the final moments left of the day, I baited a nearby sheer grub next to the part so I could have Walter nudge the part a decent distance toward my base, which just went so well. And with a couple last nudges to ensure that the guard satellite properly teleports, we made it to the end of day 8. Although we weren't nearly as productive as we were in the first Forest of Hope day, we still managed to make a ton of progress. In particular, killing both bosses is super nice. The best part though is that this makes routing for day 9 super easy. I did these guys yesterday, so now I'll focus on these. I'll hit all the stops and see how much time I got left by the end of it, so let's start off with the Ionium Jet. Now you might think that collecting this part is as simple as nudging it into a teleport spot to get it out of the water, and you'd actually be right. If this part wasn't stupid, this thing is almost impossible to nudge, more so than anything else in the entire game. I'm pretty sure this is because of its shape, with the top half keeping Olimar's massive noggin from getting close enough before laying down. This is a big issue. Or it would be if it were for Walter, baby. That's right, water is no problem anymore. By baiting another sheer grub all the way over to the part, I can have Walter push it for me. And he's not pushing it into a teleport spot, no, he's strong enough to push it up this super steep slope and completely out of the water by himself. Something that, by the way, he would not be able to do if I didn't flower him up yesterday. So, yeah, my brain's pretty adequate. From there, he continued to push it until reaching this wall, which, unlike the last one, we actually can't skip. Luckily though, this one is also much less sturdy, so I just tossed Stephanie and Jordan on it at the beginning of the day. That's right, sometimes I act in secret. And I swapped Walter out for Jordan before moving on to our next part, the gear. Why Jordan, you ask? Well, take a look at this freaking trick shot. Boom! Not only was I able to insta-kill this sheer grub I baited over, dropping a pellet that I could use to clip up to the gear, but I also simultaneously flung Jordan into an out-of-bounds area so I can grab him later. Something that was only possible because I can throw him further than the others. Once up here, you know the drill. I nudge the gear into a teleport spot before using the high ground to maneuver over to the analog computer, which has a nice little teleport spot right here. Wow, things are going super smoothly so far. It really feels like we're getting to the groove of— oh wait, I forgot. Let me reiterate this point. The lever sucks huge time. First off, it's on a floating island, and we normally need to build a bridge to access it. Unlike walls, bridges can't just be skipped by clipping through or around them, and it's not like I can bomb them to build them faster. And secondly, even once I get to the island, traversing 2 ledges is a bit of a nightmare. I'd have to bait not 1, but 2 enemies from all the way across the entire map, and somehow get one of them on top of the first ledge so I can clip up the second. I had no clue where to even start with all that nonsense, which is why I decided not to. Instead, I scheduled a visit with an old friend. Aw yeah, that's right, Flint's back in the building, baby. By manipulating Flint to walk all the way over to where the Libra is, I was able to make him run into this wall at this specific angle, which allowed me to clip out of bounds. However, although we have been walking around outside the map's bounds throughout this entire challenge, this is true out of bounds, because there's not even ground under us, and true out of bounds is freaking weird. Now, I don't really know how all this works, but what I do know is that walking in true out of bounds gives you a big burst of height for some reason, at which point whatever momentum you had going into it is conserved forever. You can't change direction once you're out here. So using that info, I walked at a specific angle that launched me straight onto the island's outer wall. And this position is ideal, as the wall slope is just shallow enough to allow Olimar to walk all the way up without even having to worry about the ledges. The only issue is that we need one last burst of height to actually reach the Libra once and for all. But luckily, we got extra height all around us.
Oh, yes!
But getting here was only half the battle, because now we gotta somehow get the Libra back to the mainland. Nudging it all the way over and tossing it into the abyss just makes it respawn back on the island, which isn't great. So instead, I had to pull some shenanigans. Why, you expect me to explain that? I got no clue why that happens. Most of the time it doesn't. But what I do know is that it has allowed the Libra to fling itself into a perfectly viable teleport spot, allowing us to finally move on. Now at this point, I actually expected to have way less time in the day, so I was kind of at a loss for what I need to do next. The only part I've yet to touch is the filter, but that thing's in the middle of the dang ocean, and Walter is busy smacking a wall right now. So I decided to instead get some progress on carrying parts back. I used some more out of bounds nonsense to zoom back to the mainland, picked up Jordan from that one out of bounds spot I never used, and used a shear grub to start carrying back the spring. This was a huge mistake. So remember how I said that the biggest problem with this area is its winds and turns, which make the paths back to our base way longer? Well, what I didn't mention is that there are walls that we can destroy to significantly shorten these paths. Now the thing is, I didn't think this would ever be worth it. I mean, look at how much effort I put into skipping just one wall. With how much time it takes for me to destroy these things, there's no way busting down an optional one is a good idea, right?
No, so wrong.
What I didn't realize is that pushing a part around this wall in particular takes at least a full goddamn minute, and 8 out of the 9 parts in this area take this path to the base. That's almost a full day's worth of time. So, a bit of advice for anyone thinking of doing this challenge themselves. Number 1, don't. And number 2, destroy this wall if you value your life. Anyway, after not doing that, I moved the spring all the way over to this area before for some reason not actually taking it all the way to the landing site and instead switching off to start moving the guard satellite? Look, making routes on the fly, not my strong suit. So after some nudging, a quick reunion with Flint, and of course, more nudging, we finally reached the last few seconds of the day. And it's here where I realized that I made, what is it, my 3rd big mistake today? I just realized I won't be able to make it. No. Yeah, I forgot they were still doing that. Somehow, Stephanie was close enough to the base to survive the night, but yeah, Walter freaking died. This actually isn't that big of a deal, because another one spawns the next day, which again is perfectly legal. So say hello to our new blue Pikmin. It's just Walter again. Come on, man, it's 1 letter removed from water. I really can't do much better than that. The only real problem with reincarnating Walter is that he's back to being a filthy leaf head. So I'll have to flower him up again at some point, but that's not the biggest deal. What is the biggest deal is that we got more planning to do. Day 10 is interesting, because at this point, we pretty much have all of the parts out and about. So carrying them back is all we really got left to do. So as a result, I decided to first tackle the furthest parts, the analog computer and Libra. Once I get them to my base, I decided to just play it by ear and make another route on the fly. Look, I can't stop myself, I thought I was good at it. But as simple as the plan was, the execution was actually kind of interesting. After rehiring the wall boys, I used the newly teleported gear to get myself and Jordan out of bounds. Once there, I navigated to the analog computer, at which point I bopped Flint on the head so he could drop a pellet that Jordan could use to nudge both it and eventually the Libra. This carried on for a couple in-game seconds and a couple out-of-game hours before I abandoned the Libra and it was back to just the computer. Yeah, as it turns out, pushing 2 parts at once, not really feasible. Eventually, we came across a big ol' wall, and the lack of a nearby teleport spot means that we're gonna have to bust this one down. It's not too bad though. I used the computer to clip through the wall and then took Jordan back and forth between it and these nearby bombs. It was honestly pretty quick. From there, I supervised Jordan's nudging all the way to the base, at which point I had just enough time to also push back the Ionium jet now that this wall has been sufficiently smacked up. And that's it. Yeah, I told you the analog computer was far. It ate up like the whole day. But fret not, cause now we're in the home stretch for this area, with the only troubling part left being the filter we've still yet to touch. But now that Walter's schedule has been freed up, we can finally tackle it on day 11. Unfortunately, it's terrible. It's so bad. First off, much like the Ionium jet, this thing is just impossible to nudge on your own. Heck, even Bert can't do it, and we've seen what he's capable of. This means that we pretty much have to use Pikmin nudging, but the issue with that is that there are no one-way objects in the area. Bert himself and the pellets he drops are way too heavy, and there's just nothing else out here. This all meant that I had to employ what might just be the ugliest strat of all time. I baited a kinda sorta nearby shear grub to the shore before quickly drowning him. Then I pushed him myself all the way over to the part for a whole quarter of the day before finally having Walter start carrying it back. Once he started though, he never stopped. Except for when this dweeb started stopping him. Yeah, I haven't mentioned this guy yet because he's been almost completely irrelevant until now, but now he's a problem. This is the Breadbug, and in a way he's kind of the 3rd boss of this area, as he's a unique enemy who's got a part inside of him. The reason we don't care though is because it's an optional part, so I've been doing my best to ignore him. The issue is that his gimmick is stealing objects from you, and when objects are what we need to push parts at all, it's obviously pretty inconvenient right now. But luckily, there's actually a really nifty trick that allows you to permanently deactivate the Breadbug for the entire rest of the game. It's called killing him. I had to take a quick detour back to my base to retrieve Jordan so we could win the tug-of-war battle against him and fight him on our own turf. And it wasn't all bad, because I was actually able to use him to super quickly nudge this guy a decent distance while we were on the way there. Once we got to the base, you're supposed to kill him by submitting the part he's holding onto into an onion, but since that would inadvertently make Pikmin, I had to instead bop him on the head a couple times to officially get rid of him, which also collected the optional part in this area, which is kinda cool, I guess. But although those were the obvious benefits from killing this dude, the real benefit came in the insight that this experience gave me, in the form of double Pikmin nudging. See, every object's weight indicates how many Pikmin are needed to carry it, but you can optionally stack up to twice that number of Pikmin onto the object in order to move it even faster. Being forced to do this so I could drag the breadbug around made me realize that, yeah, I totally should have been doing this the entire time. It makes things literally twice as fast. So with this new technique, I was able to get the Libra almost into my base just before the day ended. And you can probably guess what my plan for day 12 was. Oh, is it scrambling around the map finding light objects for Jordan and Walter to carry back? Yeah, you got it. The only interesting thing that I did today was literally watch grass grow. I need the pellets from these guys to carry back the parts, but they only grow if they're on screen. So yeah, I just looked at them for a little bit. This is optimal Pikmin gameplay. And after a bit more optimal Pikmin gameplay, we were able to get all 9 of this area's parts in the landing site, allowing us to finally finish off the area with our pre-made Pikmin in only 5 days total. At this point, there are only 8 required parts left in the entire game, and we've got 18 days to collect them. Needless to say, we're doing extremely good time-wise, which means pretty much the only thing left that can stop us is a part that's just impossible to get regardless of time. And although we've yet to come across anything of the sort, the place that'll do it might just be the distant spring. Naturally, this is the largest and most enemy-dense area in the game, but unlike the forest navel, most of the parts' paths back to our base are fairly straight, and only blocked by a couple walls or bridges here and there. So instead, the difficulty in this area comes from the fact that almost every part is in a stupid spot. The only normal one is the captain's seat, which is just sort of sitting there out in the open, which is pretty nice. But what isn't nice is the nearby bowsprit, which not only requires us to actually kill this big bug dude this time, but also build an entire bridge and knock down an entire wall in order to get it out of its arena. Over here, there's the Kronos reactor, and no joke, a second Ionium jet, both of which are on high ledges and surrounded by water. In this zone, we got the rotor, which is blocked off by a wall that only blue Pikmin can hit, and the gluon drive, which requires building 2 more bridges to access. Circling back to our base, the repair type bolt is super close by, but once again on a high ledge surrounded by more water. I'm running thin on my goddamn patience here. And finally, we got the interstellar radio, which is way out in the middle of the ocean inside this flying balloon looking enemy. Why is every part so annoying? Although time doesn't seem like it'll be too big of an issue at this point, I still wanted to make good, efficient routes for this area, just in case some future parts got hairy. My routing strategy almost entirely revolved around the bug boss, or more accurately, the bridge next to his arena. Despite my efforts, I couldn't find a way to skip building this bridge, and doing so is going to take up a lot of my time and most of my Pikmin, kinda like the breakable wall in the forest navel. This will naturally split up the area into 2 distinct eras, one where I have all my Pikmin and one where I don't. So I'll have to allocate tasks that require multiple Pikmin for after I built the bridge, and we're starting off with tasks that I can do by myself. All that is just to say, I'm doing these guys first because I can't kill the bosses yet. Yeah, my plans are pretty simple these days. I started off day 13 by tossing some boys onto the bridge before immediately running into a problem. See, usually getting up onto a high ledge to push the parts off isn't an issue. There's almost always nearby enemies that I could bait over to get the job done. And the last area was particularly kind, as the most common enemies were able to be transported across the entire map. This area, by contrast, has Dumples. These guys live in the water and have an extremely small home that they patrol, making them terrible candidates for clipping up walls as they can't be freely baited around the map. Or so I initially thought. I think, yeah, so that's what's supposed to happen. As you can see, he's schmoving. This is the Dumple Fling, my absolute favorite trick in this entire challenge. I have no idea why it happens, but if you set up a Dumple such that it's facing the direction you want it to go, and then dance on the edge of its home, it confuses them real badly or something, and some nonsense happens in the game code, yada yada, they get flung. Completely negating this issue and actually making Dumples better than Sheargrubs, or Burt. It's insane. So when I made my way over here, I flung 2 of the 3 available Dumples into these respective corners before beating them to death and using their pellets to clip onto ledges to push off the parts. If you're like me, then you might have actually been worried about pushing the Ionium Jet in particular, because, you know, the whole hard to push thing. And yeah, it definitely does make it harder to deal with, but getting it into this exact spot and then lying down next to it causes some nonsense collision interactions to occur, which allows it to eventually slide right off the ledge and into a pretty dang good teleport spot. It was at this point though when I realized that the Kronos reactor is not currently in a teleport spot, which makes it worth trying to push back right now. The issue is that pushing it back is apparently insanely annoying. Every submerged part up to this point has been absolutely no problem problem for Walter, but this one in particular is completely broken. It just hates getting out of the water. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I still don't really know what the problem was, but after using one pellet to get it used to being onto the shore, I guess, and then dialing back to use a second pellet, I was able to get it up out of there.
Oh my god, dude.
After that, I had Walter continue to push it all the way across the map until he reached this point. Our base is right there, which is nice, but we're unfortunately blocked by yet another massive wall, which is a pretty big problem. Or at least it would be if it weren't for James. Oh yeah! You might have already been able to tell, but James's face is significantly flatter than Jim's, which actually makes it much better for moving objects, which in turn also makes it much better for clipping objects. And wouldn't you know it, this was absolutely not worth it in hindsight. I should have just blown up the wall, it would have been faster. I don't know why I'm so against doing that. Am I stupid? Am I just addicted to doing glitches? I don't know why I'm like this. But regardless, now that those two parts are finally in good spots, we were able to move on. Because we had Walter with us, I figured that the glue-on drive was the best part to tackle next, as he'd be able to help out with this thing's biggest issue, the bridges. See, even though Walter should absolutely be able to push this part through the water here, the fact that there are bridges at all makes him think that that's the path that we should go on instead. So trying to push the part with the shear grub like we usually do gets him stuck at the bridge's entrance, walking around in circles waiting for us to build them like some sort of idiot. So we're gonna have to convince Walter to take the underwater route, and we can actually use the stuck Pikmin circling motion thing to do just that. After positioning the objects like this, I can have Walter pick up the shear grub, and since his current path is blocked, he starts moving in a circle around the point that he initially picked it up, which nudges the part a little bit. At that point, I can whistle him to make him drop the part right at the edge of his circle before making him pick it up again. He then goes through the same sequence of logic, but the initial position is slightly to the left. And so, by repeating these steps and consistently whistling Walter at the same point in the circle, we're actually able to get both objects off the main path and into the water. At that point, Walter finally remembers, oh yeah, I can breathe in water, and chooses a different path to the base that doesn't involve using the bridges at all. Now that's great and all, but we immediately ran into another problem after this, and that's the fact that this part is fat as heck, which actually makes it impossible to nudge out of the water, as Walter gets too close to the wall for things to line up properly. But luckily, I found a nice teleport spot nearby that would get the part out of the water for us, so I just left it there for another day and moved on. With what little time I had left, I wanted to tackle the rotor, so I went over here, used a frog to clip through this wall in what is quite possibly the easiest glitch to do in any video game ever, and then moved the rotor like 4 times into a teleport spot that'll get it past the wall on the next day. Yeah, this wall might as well just not exist. After that, I didn't really have time to do anything else substantial, so I took this opportunity to see how much progress my Pikmin have gotten on that bridge we need to build. Hey, where are they? Where'd they go? Turns out one of these dweebs, I think, snatched them up at some point during the day and scattered them a bit. Stephanie ended up being buried in this big bugs arena, poor thing, and Jordan, I don't know how, ended up completely inside this nearby wall, which is a tad unfortunate. To somewhat make up for this, I spent my last minute here gathering them back up and getting some more bridge progress before the day finally came to an end. On the next day, we found our Kronos reactor almost in our base, the Ionium jet in the middle of the pond, the rotor past its non-existent wall, and the gluon drive still in the water. Dang it, not a big problem though. I can just redo some stuff, this time making sure it's in the right spot. Yep, teleports out, it's good. And now finish off the day again. And alright, what's going on here? Now, I didn't know it at the time, silly me, but the gluon drive is currently what is known as a quantum superposition. This is to say that if I'm observing it as the day ends, then it'll teleport in the right spot. But I guess it does something else when I'm not looking, like it's doing something devious only when my back is turned, I suppose, which makes it teleport in the wrong spot. I have no clue why this is how this game works. I wish I was joking about this, but the last thing I have to do today is just look at the gluon drive. Just make sure it's behaving, and it'll work just fine. Why am I attempting to explain anything in this video? Whatever, moving on to day 14, my plan's basically the same. My bridge boys still need to get their dang work done, so I'll be working with Walter on this half of the map again. Hitting all the parts, you get the drill. But before doing anything, I went ahead and had Jordan get some damage done on this stone wall nearish my base. I'm doing this because I realized that the rotor needs to make its way through here, and I'm not going to spend my entire life clipping it through the wall, okay? My brain's functioning a little better these days. That being said though, after getting the bridge boy started, baiting away the snitch bug so he doesn't get any more evil plans, and then flinging a Dumple to get him to drop a pellet near the Ionium jet, I pushed it all the way to my base, and I clipped it through the wall. Goodbye, brain. Next up is that captain seat I neglected yesterday, but this one should be nice and easy. I mean, it's out and about, there's nothing blocking it, no water, no enemies, it's the most annoying part of all time. Oh my god, why can't I have just one freebie? This guy's issue is that he's secretly in a bit of a hole, which makes him super hard to nudge anywhere, including in Walter's pathfinding. This meant that I had to enlist the help of my good friend Bart by doing a trick called yellow Wollywog transportation. And here's how it works. It's the same way, they're the same enemy. Anyway, after baiting Bart over, I was able to get the part a little bit out of the hole, which allowed Walter to finally push it out, carry it to my base, and then clip it through that wall that I Totally could have blown up a while ago. Whatever, moving on, I circled around the map to access the rotor, which decided to teleport in a kinda stinky area. There were no nearby pellets or shear grubs that I could have Walter use to push this thing out of here, so I instead hired Bart to do the work for me. And miraculously, around the same time I got the part mostly out of the water, I heard this sound, which indicates that my bridge boys actually finished today. So I waltzed on over, congratulated them on a job well done, and very quickly had Jordan bust down this nearby wall as the day came to a close. Day 15 then marks the halfway point of this area. For now that the necessary bridge is built on the north side is basically complete, we can move on to the other half of the parts, starting with the bowsprit in the bug boss. And you know what? This fight's really cool. Making him vulnerable requires that I use one of my soldiers to block his blowhole looking thing, meaning I'll only actually be attacking with 2 of my Pikmin at a time. Since Stephanie's damage is significantly higher than these 2 goobers, I made sure that she was never the blowhole blocker. Instead, that job was usually Jordan's, as I can throw him much higher than the others, making it a bit easier. Beyond that, I also ensured that I baited out attacks as quickly as possible for more damage opportunities. I made sure that the boss stayed close to where I needed to take the object, which is fast, and I manipulated RNG to make sure my Pikmin never lost their flowers, because I need them to keep their speed in. Oh, okay, wait, never mind, I get it. Still not that interesting, we can move on. After killing him, I used both Walter and Stephanie to start carrying the part back extra fast, but I benched Steph at this point so Walter could take the water path, which avoids waking up these nearby enemies. And you guessed it, I clipped the part through the floor actually, not the wall. And this turned out to be a pretty big deal, as wherever in the world it ended up out of bounds made it respawn literally in my base on the next day. So, yeah, it's pretty dang cool. After that, I decided to tackle these 2 guys, as they were pretty close by. The repair type bolt is on another high ledge, so I had to bait a nearby bar over to this wall to clip on top of it and push it off, but that's all for some reason standard fare at this point, so let's just move on. The radio is a little bit trickier. It's in another boss enemy, so we'll probably want our entire army to take care of him, but he's also in a pretty precarious zone, surrounded by both water and a bunch of enemies, which would make it pretty dangerous whenever the boss decides to shake off all my Pikmin. But after transporting all my troops out into the middle of the ocean and tossing them on board, I was able to get this to happen. This is the Blowhog lock, something I think I accidentally discovered for the first time. Basically, if you repeatedly step in and out of this guy's home, then he'll constantly switch in between pursuing you and forgetting you exist. And if you do this fast enough, I guess it just overloads his brain to the point where he doesn't even ever think about shaking off my Pikmin, allowing them to all stay on the entire time and kill him super quick. After that glorious victory, I decided to just leave the part behind for now, so it'll teleport in a good spot for Pikmin nudging, and instead tend to the rotor a bit, which is, back in that water I got it out of. Great. Luckily, it's not too bad. Bart's still here, and he was actually able to get it to clip through the floor this time, which helped in getting it more out of the water than last time. So hopefully it won't just slide back in again tomorrow. And hey, here tomorrow is day 16. I didn't really need a plan this time around, because at this point, all we got left is pushing parts back to my base, which I got started on immediately. The first thing I did was venture out into the ocean and fling a Dumple at the radio that I could use to spawn pellets to carry it back. Before doing so, however, I went ahead and flung another Dumple from over here in a completely random direction. I did this for no reason. Don't worry about it. Anyway, I went ahead and started pushing the radio all the way across the map and into my base, which went off without a hitch. Once it was there, I turned my attention to the repair type bolt. And wait, what's this? There's already a Dumple there waiting patiently for me to kill it for pellet drops? How did this happen? Wait a second, there's no way. Did he plan this ever since the beginning? Alright, anyway, so I used that guy to also get this part into my base before moving on. I again plundered the ocean for some more Dumples to fling, and hopefully you can now see why this is one of my favorite tricks. It's so fun, it's stupid, it's cool, and it allows me to drag the last 2 parts all the way to my base without any sweat. And with that, we've kind of made it? Yeah, all we got left to do is push these 3 dweebs close to my ship, but beyond that, yeah, that's all the required parts in the game right there. I didn't even realize how close we were to achieving our goal until this exact moment, but yeah, if we just collect these parts and then sit around for the remaining 14 days, then we'll have technically beaten Pikmin without ever making Pikmin. But that ending kind of stinks, doesn't it? I mean, I didn't even build up to this moment with dramatic music or anything. Everything we've done, all that routing and all those crazy tricks accumulating to what, a normal ending? No, not on my watch. I started this challenge assuming that the time limit on every day would make collecting every part impossible. But now that we've gotten all the required parts with nearly half my days left, I'd say that this calls for a last-minute challenge revision. Is it possible to beat Pikmin without making Pikmin with 100% completion? Let the challenge truly begin. With this new goal in mind, we're now gonna have to unredact the 2 optional parts in this area and start thinking of ways to collect them. One of them is the ever-important massage machine, which is decently far from my base, but will probably require nothing more than a bit of Pikmin nudging to collect. The UV lamp, on the other hand, is a bit of a different story. This thing's real close to me, so it's probably the part I'm gonna try and make progress on the end of the day here, but how in the world am I actually gonna do that? It's sitting on a bunch of cascading ledges, like the Libra, but unlike the Libra, there's no out-of-bounds abyss that I can use to my advantage. This means that I'm actually gonna have to traverse each ledge, one by somehow getting an object on each ledge that I can use to clip. Of course, that leaves the question, what objects am I gonna use? And the answer is actually a little tricky. I'm only gonna use one object, and it's not in the way you're expecting.
Oh my gosh.
And with this newly donated high ground, thanks to Bart, I was able to nudge the UV lamp off of its ledge into the shadow realm, I guess, just as the day ended, which, to no one's surprise, teleported the part in the perfect spot on the next day. Day 17's plan is simple. We're dealing with the massage machine before finally going ahead and nudging all the parts back for collection, at which point I'll need to make an additional 10 drone Pikmin to submit the heaviest dude. And with all that, we should be able to get this area comfortably done today. The first step of the plan is a little more annoying than you may expect though. Sure, this part's just sitting out in the open, making it easy to access, but much like the glue-on drive, its current path expects us to build a bunch of bridges to cross some water. Also like last time, however, I was able to get around this by nudging the part completely off its original path to convince Walter to instead take the scenic route through the ocean, avoiding the bridges entirely. Once that dude made it into my base, I turned my attention to the UV lamp, and wouldn't you know it, I actually didn't clip it through the wall this time. Aren't you proud? Well, you shouldn't be, because I instead took the Deluxe extra stupid route by spending a million years nudging it by hand through this narrow little walkway, I think just so I could show off that I could. Whatever, surely that unnecessary time sink won't actually amount to anything, because look, all I got left to do is nudge these 3 guys into the landing site, and we should be all good, right?
I need to make 10 Pikmin. No. Oh, I forgot completely.
Yeah, so what? I had to spend an extra day here because I didn't leave myself enough time to break my own challenge rules. Whatever, I knew you guys wouldn't think that I pushed all these guys close enough to my ship to count as in my base, so yeah, that's what I spent this whole day doing. And with that, we've finished off the largest area in the game with all the required parts, but we're still far from completing our mission. Actually, that's kind of a lie. If you remember, I actually did collect the optional part from the Forest Naval, so we are pretty dang close. We only got 3 parts. Next up is the Forest of Hope, in which we completely ignored the supernova thing the last time we were here. Collecting it was far from an issue though. All we had to do was bust down a wall, sneak this part past a couple of boys, and bask in its beauty. 2 more parts remain. And believe it or not, one of them is the engine I still haven't collected. I'm not gonna lie, I forgot that I skipped this part, and in hindsight, the game totally checks if you have it at the end. The whole spiel where it might not be required was 100% me coping. So that would have been unfortunate. What isn't unfortunate, however, is the fact that I left this guy in an extremely easy spot, allowing me to collect him no problem. And with all that, 1 part remains. But unlike the last few, this one happens to reside in completely unfamiliar territory. The final trial. The final area which houses the final part in the entire game. And by a long shot, it is the hardest we've ever seen. See, for every single part in this entire run, the main challenge has been finding some way to get the part back to my base. But this is the first time since day freaking 1 where getting ourselves physically to the part is a complete mystery. The part resides inside the belly of the Emperor Bulblax, but before we can unpack all that nonsense, we first gotta find a way to traverse the first half of this area, which acts as a bit of a puzzle, with the final piece being a box that we need 10 Pikmin to push out of our way. Unlike the walls and bridges here, which, while annoying, are still possible to manage with our max of 3 dudes, boxes will simply never budge, and we dealt with all 2 of the other boxes in this game by simply going around them. Well, okay, why am I crying about this box if I can just waltz around it using one of the 100 out-of-bound tricks we found? The reason is that we can't. This place is stupid simple. There are literally 0 enemies and 0 objects available to us, both of which are things we've historically relied on to do literally anything. And I'll be honest, I'm at a bit of a loss here as a result. Without any of our usual toys to play with, we're kinda useless. Except the thing is, there might just be one single thing that we can utilize. The bomb rocks. See, I kinda lied earlier about there being no objects here, cause exactly 3 bomb rocks spawn right at the beginning of the area. The only issue is that I kinda didn't lie earlier, cause these bomb rocks are not actually available to us. They're on top of a ledge, completely inaccessible. But there's one fact about these dudes that might just make them accessible despite our situation. Their spawn location is random. This means that it might just be possible for a rock to erroneously spawn on the ground. And according to some fairly reliable resources, this has actually happened to multiple people before. 2 people, specifically, because this glitch is astronomically unlikely. So much so, to the point where there is no video proof of this ever happening to anyone. Until now.
Oh my god, dude, no way.
Oh yeah, after 2 hours of using the fast forward function on my very real Gamecube, I was able to manipulate RNG such that a rock spawns right where we need it. However, just having one accessible object now doesn't entirely solve our problem. Just kidding, it's literally in the perfect spot to give us a direct path to the boss arena, allowing us to take ourselves and all 3 of our Pikmin across the map in no time. So with all that, now is when the challenge of this part truly begins. This is the Emperor Bulblax, the hardest boss in the entire dang game. This dude has entirely too much health and a couple of pretty messed up attack patterns, but the worst part is that the primary method of killing him, being sacrificing a yellow guy to stun him with a bomb rock, is kind of a terrible option for him. It's not like we can't hurt him without stunning him, but he shakes off our Pikmin too fast for us to do any substantial damage at a time. And beating this dude quickly is kind of important, because not only would not killing him today mean we'd have to get the nearly impossible bomb rock spawn again, but he also regenerates health over time, which is a bit of an issue, generally speaking, but fret not, cause I have what you might call a strat. First, I bait out a tongue attack by standing in a specific area in front of him. Once he starts it, I can then unleash my entire arsenal on one of his cheeks as fast as possible. Then, to prevent him from immediately shaking him off, I can bait out a maximum of 1 extra tongue attack and prolong the damage a bit. From there, he's guaranteed to shake them off, so it's at that point where I'll whistle my Pikmin before they get deflowered and repeat the cycle. Doing this strat can get him to half health pretty quick. However, at that point, he'll start doing this big jump move, which is both a good and a bad thing for us. Okay, it's mostly a bad thing because we can't actually deal damage to him while he's doing it. Luckily though, which attack he does seems partially manipulatable, so we can continue to run with our cycle with only a few interruptions. And after a long dang time, we eventually got him to almost no health, at which point we can abuse the one good thing about his big jump maneuver. It's kinda hard to tell, but this arena has a bit of a bowl shape, so if we killed him right now, then the part would be in basically what is just a hole, and we'd have no way of getting it out of here. So instead, I convince him to do a big jump, and then bait him all the way out of the arena before getting the last few hits on him, not only avoiding the big hill, but also just generally moving the part closer to our base. And speaking of moving the part to our base, we aren't quite out of the woods just because we beat the boss, because now we gotta move the part back to our base. Wow, I'm good at script writing. Specifically, my goal with moving the part today was to at the very least get it off this ledge, because like I said a little earlier, having to use another bomb to get up here tomorrow would just be terrible. Seriously, I don't want to do it again. The issue is that I have very little time left in the day. It was going to be close.
Oh, wait. Is that... Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, it's in the water. Yes.
And with that, we were closing in on this game's final part. And although it wasn't actually in our base yet, I was pretty confident I'd be able to make it back, as I assume all of you watching are as well. Because at this point, after everything we've been through this entire challenge, all of us know exactly what we're capable of. From RNG manipulation, to wall clipping, to enemy baiting, to waypoint displacement, to object nudging, and to waiting around for our mere 3 Pikmin to pull their weight. So is it possible to beat Pikmin, collect all the parts, and escape the planet without ever actually making Pikmin? Well, no, it isn't. But hopefully, the many methods that went into collecting just this one part is enough to convince us that it totally could have been. Hey, welcome to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry it took me 1,000 years to make it. I didn't realize how hard this challenge would be. Go ahead and do all the YouTube things, especially commenting. I read and love all your comments. It's my biggest motivator. My gamer subs link is also in the description if you're interested. It's the best way to support me if you're into that. Also, by the way, not really that important, but I cheated. The last part, I manually moved a bomb rock off its ledge. It didn't actually spawn there. I did actually try to manipulate RNG for 2 hours. It just never worked. I don't think it's possible for one of the rocks to spawn off the ledge, but I do think it's possible for all 3 of the rocks to spawn on top of each other right next to the ledge, and that could push one of them off. And that would also explain why you have to be so lucky for it to happen. I didn't lie about the fact that it has happened to other people, so it is real. So I just manually moved it to test the proof of concept, and it made for a better video, so I don't want to hear about it, okay? Don't talk to me.